Evening or afternoon. We're in that weird quasi in between zone. But happy Saturday to all of you who are tuning in live here at the LCI Green Room. I'm, of course, Jacob Winograd, host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, and I'm excited for tonight's stream. It's actually going to be two streams tonight, and I unfortunately just am behind in promoting all of this, but I'm going to be doing a short conversation with a Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania candidate for treasurer right after I'm done talking to Clint. So it's a double feature tonight. And then next Tuesday, we have Angela McCardle coming on, and she'll be kind of talking about some of the same things I'm talking to our guest about tonight, but taking a little bit different angle because she was an organizer for past weekend's festivities. So a lot of good stuff coming up. Make sure, if you're not already, that wherever you're watching, you're subscribed. Give this video a thumbs up. We super appreciate that. Tonight's guest is really someone that hopefully doesn't need too much introduction. He's been on my show a couple times over the years. Clint Russell, he's the host of Liberty Lockdown, and he's been all over the place in the movement party, been on Timcast and all sorts of stuff. So Clint, thanks for being here with us tonight. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me, Jacob. Glad to be back on. Glad to be out of DC. Everything's good, man.
Yeah, there's always something weird about traveling into the belly of the beast, isn't it?
It does. It feels odd, for sure. You're like, I'm not supposed to be here. But it was for a good cause, so I'm glad to have done it.
Yeah. No, I wasn't there Saturday. I did watch a lot of the speakers and things going on through the live stream, but I was there for the Sunday event. But you were there for both. So for those who don't know, so last Saturday, this would have been, I don't have the dates in front of me. It was the last weekend of September, so you can figure out that I think it was the 28th and the 29th. And in DC, near the Washington Memorial, we had, there were two back-to-back rallies. Angela McCardle was involved in both of them, but they're kind of related, kind of different. There's some crossover. It's a little bit confusing, but the first one being Rage Against the War Machine on Saturday, and the second one being Rescue the Republic. And Clint, you spoke at the Rage Against the War Machine rally, and there were a lot of speakers there along with you. What did you talk about on Saturday? And just for those who maybe don't know about the Rage Against the War Machine Coalition, what's the background of that, and how did you decide to get involved and participate?
Well, I got involved just because Angela invited me, but we ended up interviewing Daniel McAdams, co-host of the Ron Paul Report, and it was just Josie and I interviewed him for like maybe half an hour on stage. Honestly, Saturday was disappointing. There was maybe a couple hundred people there, but it was good event. The first one we did, there was thousands of people. That was about a year ago, and that was I thought very successful. Created a huge turmoil within the Libertarian Party because we allied with a bunch of lefties to rage against war, but I still thought it was a worthwhile cause.
Hold on, I thought we were Nazis, and they're upset because we allied with lefties.
Look, I can't figure it out, man. But then Sunday was Rescue the Republic, and it was huge. I mean, I don't know exactly how many people. I got yelled at by Karen Ann Harlos for saying it was 25,000. It seemed like it was that many. I don't know. It was a lot of people. So super successful. The lineup on Sunday was insane, just stacked. Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, a bunch of other people that I know and like a lot, and I was very impressed. So glad to be a participant in both of them, and Angela invited us out there, so that's all there was to it. We went and did our best.
Yeah, I mean, it was hindsight being 2020, but I'm wondering if perhaps I know weather probably played somewhat of a factor into the attendance on probably the entire weekend. But I wonder
it was supposed to be raining, and it ended up not being, but I agree that kept some people away.
But I wonder if also again, there's no point in convincing too much about it, I suppose. But I wonder if perhaps it was just a little bit too much to try to do like two back-to-back rallies that were kind of different but kind of had some overlap. Like if it had been the same rally over 2 days or something like that. But I feel like uh, trying to do two and just the way anyway. Just my thoughts on it. I'm supportive of both events. I think that it's from what I can tell, like you said, the Saturday turnout wasn't as good as the turnout at the event last year. But you win some, you lose some. I guess that's all I can say. You miss all the shots
Yeah.
you don't take. But just even though there wasn't a huge turnout, there's still a lot of people who watch online and stuff. So it's not like it's all for nothing. But I suppose the difference in tone and maybe speeches that were given between both events is something that has come under a bit of criticism. And I know you talked a little bit about this in an episode you did on your show this past week. And I'm kind of trying to work this out myself. And so I was kind of excited to have you on and try to have a conversation about this because these events are sort of representative of a lot of the outgrowth of what I guess the Mises Caucus was trying to create in the Libertarian Party and in the Libertarian movement that there hasn't been a lot of, which is more coalitions in general, and whether that's single issue or something like this, which is now like Rage Against the War might be a single issue, but then what happened on Sunday was kind of different. How would you describe the Rescue the Republic rally in terms of what its focus was? What were the goals and themes that the speakers talked about? A lot of people, of course, and it's kind of the same 10 people, 20 people that we always hear from, but suggested that this was just a MAGA Trump rally in disguise. That wasn't my takeaway. I'd like to hear what your thoughts were.
I mean, it certainly had undertones that were Trumpian, in that you had Tulsi Gabbard and Robert Kennedy Jr. and a handful of other surrogates for Trump. So I wouldn't say that it wasn't that, but it was basically just about rescuing the republic. That a lot of people believe that we're losing kind of the foundational premise of our country, and that we need to come together to stop it. So that was the focus. It was less focused on preventing World War III and more focused on salvaging the Bill of Rights. And that was kind of the angle that most of the speeches took. So that was kind of the difference between the 2 days.
Yeah, and so yeah, for sure, it's impossible to ignore that there were people there who were supporting Trump, and so I guess to give the devil their due or his due, that I can understand where maybe that accusation comes from. But in terms of just like my experience attending different things, and then when I was there so I was there with LCI, we were there as media, we were interviewing people who were attending. We were interviewing some of the speakers when they came into the media booth. And although there was some support for Trump, it seemed like the sentiment was much more about something that's going to go beyond even just this election, which is sort of an opposition to sort of like the common enemy that a lot of these different groups share. And it seemed like each speaker was at least, all of them, but a majority of the speakers were acknowledging the fact that the people attending weren't a monolith. Like it wasn't just a bunch of, it wasn't like Trump showed up and it was just a bunch of MAGA Republicans, diehard Trumpers in attendance. It did seem to me that there was a diverse sort of like coalescence of people who were there for like specific issues, sometimes health freedom or medical freedom, and then also people that were there from different political factions, not devoted to a single issue. What do you think about that? This sort of like coalescence of different factions coming together in response to, I guess, some of the goings on in the current administration.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment. I mean, it was lots of people that were there for health freedom, for sure. Like, I don't know, to quantify it, maybe a third. I'd say probably a quarter were there for World War III concerns, and then probably the remainder were, Trump adjacent supporters. So very, very diverse group of people. As far as like these coalition building, I think it's necessary. I mean, it's mandatory. We're tremendously outnumbered. The media operates against all of us, and so does the news. So if we don't come together, I don't see how we stand a chance whatsoever. So I liked seeing it personally, and I think that this is probably the most hopeful thing that we're witnessing right now in this currently very toxic political climate, but this seems to be a positive thing.
Yeah, and I came, my audience knows, and you might remember from our past conversations, I came from the Democratic Party. So when I see, uh, sorry, what?
Sorry, someone's at my door. You give me 1 second?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. I will filibuster here for a little bit, and while I'm waiting for Clint to come back, first of all, remind people to subscribe and like us if you haven't already, and also I'll just share some of my own experiences from that weekend. So we went down there, and first of all, the attendance of it was pretty wild. Um, and when I'm talking about a diverse group of people, I mean, I'm out there. I remember I was out there recording Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand who were talking together, and I'm, kind of like live streaming it to Twitter uh, for LCI, and someone made a joke about the Democratic Party, and then I heard like 3 or 4 people around me. It was about like what happened to the anti-war left, and 3 or 4 people around me were just like, we're still here. And it's funny because I come from the anti-war left, and when the anti-war left seemed to vanish after Trump, and when the left was completely hijacked by this sort of like corporate wokeism that seems to be the prevailing ethos of the Democratic Party today, I found myself politically homeless, and I think a lot of people have. And it's unfortunate that maybe a lot of them have, gone to the Republican side or to the Trump side because they don't know that there's any other options. But a lot of them, when you get down to it, they're not your typical Republicans. They are, they're a lot like I was before I encountered Murray Rothbard and Mises and all that. They don't quite understand economics, but they have the right instinct in terms of distrust for authority and distrust for sort of this relationship between corporation and state. And that's something that that I appreciated being there was Clint. So while you were gone, and I'll just summarize it for you. I just shared my experience again of how I went from being on the left to becoming a libertarian, and how it was interesting being at this event this past weekend and running into a bunch of people who, like, I think it was when
they remind you of you, right?
Well, yeah, they reminded me of someone in the. I think it was when Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand were talking, but I can't remember exactly. But someone asked what happened to the anti-war left, and I heard like 3 or 4 people around me that were like, "Oh, I'm still here," and they were like, "Yeah, me too." And I was just like, "Oh, cool." You guys still exist.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Because after Trump,
I feel terrible for those people. By the way, I mean, just to like have your party leave you. It's kind of the same thing that happened to the neocons within the GOP, where they're like, "Wait a second, we were the pro-war party. What happened?" So I feel bad for both sides, less for the neocons.
Yeah, well, no, it's funny because, and I know, like, so this will get into, I think, the heart of what I want to talk to you about, which is that I know that, so the most common criticism you're going to get from sort of the anti-war libertarians, of which you and I would be a part of, that sort of group, is that, well, this, even if it wasn't a Trump rally, there was too much Trump support, and a lot of these speakers, even if they might talk a good game, they're inevitably supporting Trump, and Trump is not truly anti-war. And they might point at his past record, they might point at his support for Israel, which, I don't see it as much as maybe others do because I'm not on Truth Social, but I had a friend of mine share me the stuff that Trump says on Truth Social, and it was like, Israel's our greatest ally, and, we're going to, all the typical stuff, which I get it. It's frustrating. And I know when I talk to anti-war leftists, which there are still a few, like my sister, I know is an anti-war leftist, and yeah, like she's incredibly frustrated that like it doesn't matter who she's going to vote for this year. Uh, Whoever she votes for, they're going to be a major Zionist, and they're going to support what Israel's doing in the Middle East. But I wonder, I want to get your thoughts on this. I wonder how much of the people who are up there speaking are pro-Israel because they've really like researched the topic and they know sort of like the history and they've like read, Scott Horton and antiwar.com and things like that. And then they just went, nope, I reject that. And I actually just buy wholesale the, Israeli propaganda. Or if it's just that they haven't looked much into this and they're just looking from like a very like rudimentary level. They go, well, we're trying to defend Western values, and Israel seems to be kind of like on the side of Western values. Like when I look at someone like Jordan Peterson, I think that's sort of the someone who I think thinks deeply about a lot of topics. But on this one, I think he clearly like there's not much more to it than just a general pro-West sentiment at play.
Well, you hear it all the time. They're not just they're our greatest ally, but they're the only democracy in the region. So they say that constantly, and I think that's the primary driving force for many of them is that like it's still kind of the like the echoes of the neoconservative worldview in that we have to spread democracy. Well, we don't have to spread it there; it exists there already. So that's great, and we have to maintain that. I just feel like I don't care. I don't care if there's a democracy in the Middle East. I just don't want my tax dollars or my bombs going there. So that's my primary frustration with it. But I think you're right. I think Jordan Peterson does view it that way, and he's also surrounded by a lot of people that, Israel is their primary concern. So I think that has a major influence on him. But I mean, I don't. Who else was there that's like super pro Israel? I assume you're talking like Tulsi and RFK.
Yeah, I guess those are the only other two that come to mind. I know like it wasn't there. So at Rage Against the War Machine rally, I know there was at least one speaker who was very vocal about opposing Zionism. I forget his name. I know Jimmy Dore was there on Sunday, and he made some comments in criticism of Israel. So it's not like the entire event was a monolith even there. But certainly some of the biggest names seem to be not just throwing their support behind Trump, but also when they are talking about the subject themselves are generally pro-Zionism. Although I didn't hear Russell Brand talk about Israel at all, and I'd be curious what his positions are because his political evolution is weird, but like Russell Brand from 2 years ago, I can't imagine would be a Zionist. So that's something that I'd be curious to hear him talk about, or if he has talked about it, to see that.
Even after the war began, he was speaking out on behalf of the Gazans, of the Palestinians. So I think that he's still concerned about that. I think he's just a real lefty, just like really concerned with war and really concerned with the plight of the impoverished or the oppressed. So he may not talk about it that much anymore, but I'd be surprised if he's flipped entirely and he's like, no, this war is great and we need to see much more of it. So I don't think that's the case.
What are your thoughts? You talked about this on your show. What are your thoughts on Russell Brand since we brought him up? I mean, he's someone who a few years ago was a super left-leaning anarchist, like a self-described anarcho communist, or I forget the other, like anarcho
syndicalist.
Syndicalist. That's the word I was looking for. And and even then, he'd always have at least the right instincts, criticizing the state in very similar ways to what we would. He was very against the COVID regime, for example. So unlike some libertarians and anarchists who, who of the left-leaning persuasion decided that, no, actually the best thing we can do to resist the state is to roll over and let them jab us with experimental medical procedures. Russell was on the right side of that, but he's now seemingly had a rightward political evolution and also a bit of a spiritual evolution, which a lot of people are describing as a grift. That basically, like, well, it's easy for him to just come out and say, I'm Christian now and I'm baptized, and to go in front of right-wing crowds, which are filled with people like me who are conservative evangelicals and just pander to us. And that's it. That's basically just like, well, it's just rather convenient. And I suppose, well, like, is that possible? Like, yes, absolutely. One of the things that led me out of the Republican Party before I was old enough to vote, because I was raised in a Republican household, was I could just tell that for 90% of Republicans, their rhetoric concerning Christianity, abortion, was all just lip service and ultimately a grift to get votes. But I don't. Again, I mean, I don't know Russell, and I know you also don't know him. You might have briefly met him, but it's not like you got to know the guy real close either. But
Well,
just my impression is that he's it doesn't come across to me as a grift, at least.
well, he is an actor, so I can't say definitively. But you tell me, is it profitable to grift conservative? I mean, he's not a politician; he's a podcaster. Like, is that a lane that's going to be so fruitful that he should put on this act? Because to me, it doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. He was already tremendously successful as a podcaster, so how much more is there to gain by faking this? So that's kind of my initial assumption as to whether or not it's legitimate. But you tell me, is it profitable to grift Christian?
I mean, it can be. Donald Trump made the Trump Bibles, and those are being lobbied to be put into public schools right now, which I have super mixed feelings about. On one hand, I'm like, well, I mean, there's a lot worse you could be putting into public schools, as we all know, but I also don't like, despite not buying into Trump derangement syndrome, I don't like when we use the Bible for when we brand it in like a political person's name, because that seems to me kind of confusing the message of what Christianity is about. But yeah, I think it can be. I don't know if it's profitable money wise. I guess it can be. It definitely seems profitable indirectly in terms of politics, which is what the Republican Party's done for a long time. But as you pointed out, it's not like he wasn't successful already. And if you followed Russell for a long time, like he was in Hollywood, he was like living it up. Like he had everything that, like, from a worldly perspective, like a sort of like left leaning, hedonistic sort of like, materialist perspective. Like he was living the dream, but he became dissatisfied with that. He went through, like, I think, a kind of a 12-step program thing, and started a podcast because he was like, I didn't want to do this. I wasn't happy. I realized there had to be more to life and there had to be something spiritual. And he was a bit more like Hindu-y Buddhist for a while during that phase. And that seemed to be fine for him. So, like, I don't know what there is to, like, for someone who maybe came out of the woodworks to do it and then gain notoriety. Okay. But this guy already, like, he's actually, I think every step of the way, he's been narrowing his audience rather than expanding it. I mean, the amount of people who will seriously listen to Russell Brand today compared to 5 years ago, 8 years ago is severely diminished, in my opinion. So I guess that's where I'm coming from, and just the content of what he's talking about. It's, I don't know. Again, as you say, he's an actor. He's good with words, so maybe he's just really good at or putting those words together in a way that you want to hear. But I gotta say, is like, my whole thing is libertarianism and Christianity and connecting, faith and freedom. And when he was up there with Jordan Peterson, I was like, I don't know what I could even add to what they're saying, because they're just hitting the nail on the head.
Well, Top was concerned about intertwining politics and faith, and he thinks that it's a grift. I don't know, but he says that it's dangerous. Obviously, you do that very much so, combining the two. So, do you see the danger that he's alluding to? I've been meaning to talk to him about this, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Well, yeah, there's certainly, so that's, like, for example, why I wouldn't like the Trump Bible, because that seems to me to be a bad way. But I guess it just depends on if you're mixing faith and politics, but to the end of promoting a particular political candidate, and kind of like especially a brand. Like Trump's not just a person. Trump is like a brand, and that's kind of where my concern comes in there. And certainly a lot of people can grift the Bible and grift Christianity. But in terms of but like if what you're doing is connecting the two to sort of speak to the opposite of that, to say, well, because I'm a Christian, I reject the the lure of power and the lure of control that the state and statism represents, and sort of reject this sort of like cultural phenomena where we reject God to then embrace worship of the self, and that leads to like all of the really perverse things that we see in our culture from the left, from the radical, trans LGBT ideology to the just like the radical, like regardless of where any libertarian stands on abortion, because that's a complicated political discussion between like anarchists and minarchists. But certainly when you see people who are just like, well, I'm going, and like it's not hyperbolic. And what I get a little angry because sometimes they're like, well, that doesn't happen, and I'm like, no, it literally does happen, where you see women going around saying, like, bragging about how many abortions they've had, and uh I mean, this is what every like A-list Hollywood actress does, is go out there and talk about how we have to vote down Donald Trump because, like, not for any legitimate reason, not for like because Trump's still not anti-war enough, not because Trump's pro-tariff and not actually good on the economy. Like, no, it's because he's going to oppress women, and it's going to be the Handmaiden's Tale and all this, and it's just this radical, not like Ayn Rand selfishness, but like this very secular, self-worshipping selfishness that we see. Like, these are, so like when Russell's up there with Jordan, I don't think they're mixing politics and faith in a way that's feeding into that. It seems to be more that, like, I mean, as a Christian, I believe that the Bible, that the gospel, it informs how we are to live life, and it's not just that trope of like a personal relationship with God, although that's an element of it, but it's also, I mean, the gospel message started out with Jesus proclaiming for people to repent, for the kingdom of God was at hand, and there was a political element to Jesus's ministry on earth, which is why he got in trouble with the Jews and the Romans, because he was proclaiming to be the one true king. So like so yeah, I get what Top is concerned about, and I would sort of share some of those concerns, but I don't know, other than the potential Zionism which Jordan dabbles in, which is disappointing. I'm not sure that there's anything there I would necessarily be immediately concerned about.
Yeah, I think that from my vantage point, the greatest concern would be, trying to put into law some sort of Christian. Oh God, my alarm, the building alarm is now going off. Give me a couple minutes, man. I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right.
If you could do like an ad break or something, I hope. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I'll do something like that. I'll just remove him till he comes back. Maybe there's some deep state satanic forces at play here, trying to prevent Clint and I from talking tonight. That is pretty wild. Speaking of libertarian Christianity, and well, that's all we do here at LCI. And as you see there at the bottom ticker, Christiansforliberty.net, or you can go to libertarianchristians.com to find out more about us. So I'm one of the podcast hosts here at the Libertarian Christian Institute. We have actually a whole selection of different shows. We have our flagship show, the Libertarian Christians Podcast, mine, which is the Biblical Anarchy Podcast. We have the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. We have the Faith Ventures Podcast, which is pretty cool, where our founder, Norman Horn, interviews different entrepreneurs and business owners and just Christians who have had actual, like, real life stories to share with us, like testimonies about how their faith came into conflict with things in the corporate world, or things with government, and how they were able to, through faith and through an understanding of sort of free market principles, how they were able to overcome certain adversities. So we have a whole lot of different shows as well as articles and books. So if you go to libertarianchristians.com, if you're curious about finding more about what we what the connection would be between libertarianism, free market economics, and what the gospel message of the Bible is, uh, that would be a good place to start. We have a very good book, which I'll on my other side here, Faith Seeking Freedom, which I'd recommend getting. This is sort of like if you have questions, if you're kind of like, I mean, from either direction. Let's say you're a Christian and you're liberty curious, or let's say you're a libertarian, but you're kind of like, I don't know, I've thought about Christianity before, but I don't know, I have concerns about if that would be compatible or not. Well, this book's a good way to address a lot of those concerns from both sides, no matter where you're coming from. It's sort of like a Q&A format book. So like I'm just going to flip it open here and, we start out by answering kind of like basic questions that people will just have about kind of like meta level questions, like why should I care about politics and things I was just talking about with Clint in terms of, well, if Jesus said my kingdom's not of this world, why should we care about politics, care about the state? We should just live quiet lives, which is something the Bible does say, is that Christians should live quiet lives. But again, my answer to Clint was basically reading from this book, because so the answer to that question is from the book. As Jesus announced the coming of God's kingdom throughout the Gospels, we see that his kingdom did not operate upon the principles of worldly kingdoms. This doesn't mean that the kingdom of God is not for this world. So that's the distinction. The kingdom of God is not of this world, but that doesn't mean it's not for this world. The very word kingdom is inherently political, meaning the king's domain. Modern Christians often miss the explicitly political language of the New Testament. The phrases Jesus is Lord and Son of God were in Jesus' day an affront to Caesar, and it was Caesar who rode into cities on a war horse demanding people's allegiance, promising an age of peace won by violence, and demanding submission. In contrast, Jesus came promising the life of the age to come through faith in him. A peace that was not won through violence, but through the forgiveness of sins and allegiance to him. To give allegiance to Jesus Christ is to strip Rome of its power and authority. So this is why if you go to libertarianchristians.com, you'll see we have little shirts and hats that say Jesus is Lord, but like before, or like right below Jesus, it says Caesar, and it has it like cut out. So it's like Caesar is Lord, Caesar's cut out, and it says, no, actually, Jesus is Lord. Which, if you guys, those of you watching, you probably remember back, like, after the whole Candace Owens blow up with Daily Wire, when she was going around saying Christ is King. And it's funny because this gets into a lot about, so I'll just keep on doing some selfless, some self-promotion here. I've been talking on my podcast a lot lately about theology, but because it connects to politics. So a lot of people who are maybe new to this sort of like conversation or new to this podcast, you probably know that there's a lot of Christians who seem to blindly support Israel and connect it to their theology. And they say, well, the Bible says this and that about Israel, and we have to support Israel because they're God's chosen people, and God promised them this land, and yada, yada, yada. If you know a little bit more about it, you would know that dispensationalism is the theological persuasion that influences a lot of these Christians. And Clint's back here, so I'll hopefully you're not no FBI operatives or anything are coming to.
No FBI, but the alarm has gone off twice and then it stopped. So I hope it's a false alarm. We'll see. Just quick question for you. Do you think that the dispensationalist, I think I pronounced that right, strain is diminishing in America?
It sort of is. It's complicated because a lot of people are unfortunately falling into the extremes on both sides. So a lot of people are maybe rejecting dispensationalism, but then those who are sometimes going too far the other way and just going into complete like a Nick Fuentes style where they're like,
I've seen the other way.
Yeah, and that's a problem, is that people are too easily, it's like rejecting one violent collectivism for another violent collectivism. And I know that's the, obviously you see the problem there, and it's tough. Even like someone like Candace Owens, who I kind of admired her initial stance against the Daily Wire, and I defended her for a little bit. She's kind of like not gone full Fuentes, but like a couple times she's been a little bit too, I think, uh, clumsy or irresponsible with her rhetoric. Not maybe it could be just an accident, or I don't know. I don't know her heart, but yeah, it does seem like. And I was while you were gone, I was reading, because actually the book that LCI wrote, called Faith Seeking Freedom, and this is like a Q&A book on different issues from the Christian libertarian perspective. So it's like, well, it's like, and it'll answer both. Like, what do libertarians think about immigration? What do Christians think about immigration? What do libertarians think about property rights? What do Christians think about property rights? Kind of in that style. Well, the first question is kind of getting to what your question was about Top's concerns, which is sort of, if Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world," well, then why should we care about politics? Should we be separating them? And the answer being that the gospel message is inherently political, because Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world, but it is for this world." And Jesus's reign has implications for Caesar of his time, but then also for the governments of today. Which, that was a point that Russell Brand was kind of, picking up in his speech, was that, like, our this, and this is like when you read Rothbard, like I read like Anatomy of the State, and he kind of picks up on the how the state sort of tries to claim a sort of like position of absolute moral authority and sovereignty in society. It just seems to me, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this. It seems to me that if you don't have something like Christianity, which puts something in that position of sovereignty, that then you are leaving that sort of like vacuum open for something like the state to come and grab a hold of, and then
Well,
sort of
just
create their own religion with.
look at the deification of Fauci. I mean, isn't it obvious that that's what people do? So yeah, I think that that's definitely like human instinct, that we need that. As Jordan Peterson famously says, or I'm sure he stole it from someone, but a God-shaped hole. And it seems like people do replace that with the state if it's not filled with God. And from my vantage point, I've always tried to fill it with just liberty itself. But I think that most people can't do that, and I think for most people, Christianity is a far superior thing to worship than the state or basically anything else. So that's why I just don't understand the outrage about seeing someone who's a reformed sinner, like overtly so. Russell Brand was a sex addict and a drug addict, and God knows what other terrible things he's done in his life. And now he's this repentant evangelist, and it's like, well, maybe his style isn't for you, but is that not what you want to see in the world? Like, is that not what you want to have come about? So I think that to me was the biggest surprise. Is like that clip I put out did 14 million views on X. So I got thousands of replies, and I can't tell you how many people were like fraud, grift, bunch of other negative things that I won't repeat on your show. But and I was just amazed at how negative the reaction was, and kind of my takeaway, even as someone who's not very religious myself, but it seemed as if people were offended. I mean, some of the religious people were offended, which I found totally bizarre. But the thing that I found more interesting is that a lot of the non-religious were furious. And I think that speaks to something, and I'm not sure what, but that was my takeaway.
Well, so I made a post about my thoughts on this on X a few days ago, and I've thought this for a while, but I didn't have a name to give it until I looked it up, because I was like, there has to probably be a name for this. And when I found it, it like made perfect sense. I think, and this is a problem we see like in our spaces, like in libertarian spaces and in our time in the Libertarian Party, but I also see this with Christians too. And it's kind of like what people call a Jonah complex, which the way that it's defined uh, by Google at least is a psychological condition that keeps us grounded in our comfort zones, afraid to embrace change or greatness. It can be a fear of also, and I think this can extend to others. It's like if we see others that are overcoming adversity, if we see others that are engaging in uh, sort of things that we're not comfortable doing ourselves, that because we can't do it, we then judge them for doing it. And also, it can be if you know the story of Jonah, God tells Jonah to go to Nineveh to tell them that they need to repent because of all the sins that they engage in, and Jonah doesn't want to go, and it's like partly because he's afraid to, but also partly because he's like, well, they don't deserve it. They're just so bad. They shouldn't have a shot at redemption. And it's almost kind of like this elitist kind of thing. And you know what? Like when you start thinking about it, isn't that sort of the same attitude that so many libertarians and unfortunately also I would say Christians have, which is that they don't. It's ironic when Christians have it because our whole religion's about redemption. But it's like they don't want people to be redeemed. Like they would rather continue to be big fish, ironically, the Jonah story, but they want to be big fish swimming in small ponds. And that's kind of what I feel like is going on in libertarian circles is that they don't like these coalitions because, and listen, they can like give it other arguments. They can go, well, this person's a Zionist and that person wants universal health care. It's like, okay, do we just want to be, do we want to forever be stuck in this place where we go to libertarian conventions and the same 50 to 100 people show up and we, make the same jokes and we tell the same speeches and we, we're moving ships around on the Titanic every couple of years? Or do we want to actually increase liberty in our society? And do we want to actually make more libertarians? Well, if we actually want to do those things, then we can't be afraid to go to Nineveh and preach the message that needs to be preached. And I don't know about you, but I get so frustrated when I hear people say that the libertarian moment and the Ron Paul moment has come and gone. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we don't have an uphill battle in terms of the actual enemy, but in terms of the people themselves, there are so many people who are still coming to understand more about libertarian ideals, and they haven't heard these ideas ever. And when I was having conversations with people about this whole thing with FEMA and North Carolina, and they're just like, how could it be this bad? And I'm like, all right, well, here's some quotes from Mises and Rothbard on the problem of economic calculation and social planning. Is that even if you put saints in these positions, they would fail to do their job. And we know that they're not saints, that half of the government is probably, Epstein Island level, connected pedophiles and just the scum of the earth. So when it's like, and people hear that and they're like, wow, I've never thought about that before. But, and so they start, embracing more of a free market mindset. But it's like a lot of people don't want to do this because of, I think, what I've labeled as this Jonah complex, the fear of success. It's a fear of going outside our comfort zones, and it's a fear to let go of our judgment of others because we want to cling on to that moral superiority that oh, we're the cool club, right? We got it all right. We don't, but, and it's easier to Monday morning quarterback than to go out there and do it yourself.
But at its core, it's all ego, right? Because it's like, I got here first. I'm special. You're late, you're not special. And that was the energy that I get. I get that from a lot of libertarians, and I agree with everything you said there. But also what I saw was a lot of Christians feel that way about Russell Brand. They're like, oh, I've been suffering in these trenches for decades, and here you come along, Sally come lately, Christian come lately. So I thought that was, I see the similarities and the overlap for sure, and I think that your question is a good one. Do we actually want to see our ideas implemented? Do we actually want to see our ideas spread? Or do we want to be little special boys by ourselves in our little club? And, my answer is I don't care about being a little special boy in my club. I really want to see these ideas implemented, and I don't think we have any time to wait. I mean, we're on the precipice of World War III, for God's sakes. Do you care the character and the heart and the deepest fabric of the advocate who's saying, hey, let's defund Israel. Hey, let's defund the war in Ukraine. Like, do you care? Are you going to purity test that person? Because I'm not. I'm not going to purity test that person whatsoever. This is why I was such an outspoken advocate for RFK Jr., much to the disapproval of many, and my diehard longtime listeners that are libertarians. And this is why, like, I think RFK is terrible on so much, but there are it's triage. There are priorities. There are things that have to happen. We cannot fail in this regard. So that's why I think this kind of ties into your earlier question about coalition building. It's like, we have to. We just simply don't have a choice. So I liked seeing it. I like seeing Russell Brand convert. I like seeing Jordan Peterson get down on a knee and pray in front of tens of thousands of people. I thought it was a really powerful moment. And does it save the world? Probably not. But it's certainly not something I'm going to critique. So,
well, it's also so what you just said there reminds me of another thing that now this is not new. Like, I say this too much. But it's the nirvana fallacy, which is there's so many libertarians who, if like the thing you're doing can have even like one hole poked in it to go, well, but like that's not going, this could have this drawback, or it might not accomplish as much as you want to, and it doesn't get you where you want to go, then it's wrong, right? It's like, so like if we do a coalition with all these people and we come away and it's like, hey, here are all the positive takeaways, right? Like people talking about rejecting the state as being sovereign in our society, people wanting to abolish like the Department of Education, and people wanting to have more freedom and individual sovereignty in their medical choices and in their food choices, and all these different things. And they go, yeah, but you know what? They're still voting for Trump, and they're not like we said earlier. They're still, too many of them are pro-Zionist, and they're not voting for Chase Oliver, so therefore it's a total failure, and it's just a Trump rally. And I'm like, that's such for the party that brands itself, for the movement that brands itself as the third option, right? And as many times as you hear these people go, we got to end the duopoly, they have such binary thinking, right? Like it's this all or nothing, like either, and I think it's partly because a lot of libertarians of the the sort of like old guard of the Libertarian Party before the Mises Caucus, to them it was all about votes. And so when it's all about votes, well, it's all about, okay, are they voting LP? Because if not, they're my enemy. And I'm like, well, no wonder you don't have any friends that aren't libertarians, because you think that every single person who doesn't vote libertarian is evil rather than just like misguided. I mean, and weren't we all there once? I mean, I wasn't a libertarian my whole life. I don't think you were either. It's like we all come from somewhere, and I thank God the people that got me to where I'm at today, didn't. I mean, I shouldn't say this, but the last duopoly candidate I voted for was Hillary Clinton. It doesn't get much worse than that.
Oof.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I am a second-gen libertarian, so I have been a libertarian since I was a kid, but that doesn't matter, because the point is, like, I still have changed my opinion on certain topics. Like, we're not static beings. We're not static creatures from birth until adulthood, and you shouldn't be static even once you're an adult. You should still be evaluating and testing these ideals. So I agree with everything you said. I don't have much to add to it other than to say I just think that, like, purity testing in this junction is crazy. It really is. I mean, 35 trillion debt, World War III, civil strife, multiple assassination attempts against the former and likely future president of the United States. Looks like it's happening from our own government. I can't prove that definitively. And then, like, there's all this negative. And, like, the one positive thing we're witnessing is that you have Brett and Eric Weinstein and RFK and Tulsi and Vivek and Donald Trump, all not libertarian, but all coming together in a direction that's far more libertarian than our current paradigm. And you can't spin that positively at all? Like, zero? Really? So that's my opinion of it. I think that it's a great thing. It's a tremendous opportunity for us, and that, like, if we have an opportunity to influence that in a more libertarian direction, to kind of shave down some of the issues that we really hate that's part of that coalition, well, then we better be involved. Like, this is our shot, because it will eventually form itself to be something that's more static than what it is right now. Like, what it is right now is this kind of bizarre amalgamation of lots of different interests and ideas. But it will be narrowed down at some point, I would imagine, just
Well,
by the nature of, party building.
I agree, and there's two directions I want to go with that. One, I'll do this first because there's a comment actually that lines up with it. Power Heals says, even if their faith is a grifter move, it's still a W that the popular thing is faith, and the same logic applies to lip service from politicians now. The Overton window has shifted. So that's a valid point that, like, if you can make money by appealing to Christians and libertarians, well, that is evidence of a much shifted Overton window. But that would lead to and that's something that can be good even if we can't know. We can't know if Russell Brand and Jordan Peterson are genuine. We can just, like, all we can do is judge them by their fruit. And so far, I'd say it's a net positive on that end. But on the other end, then, if that's where we're at, well, then how do we leverage the position we're in to get the best outcome? And I think that people like Angela McArdle, who are getting a lot of heat for not just doing the easy thing and going out there and just like, well, here's our candidate, go vote for him, and doing the same, they're like, you know what, we're going to take a chance on this, weird thing with Trump right now after he came to our convention, and we're going to see what we can get out of it, and also kind of double down on these different coalitions that we're a part of. Because regardless of how this next election goes, like, even if Trump wins, and let's say, like, even, I don't know, let's kind of give like the best case scenario. Let's say that Trump wins. Let's say that Ross Ulbricht is freed. Let's say that he abolishes the Department of Education. Like, let's say, like, everything he promised to do, he comes through with. Okay, we're still going to have an uphill battle ahead of us if every single one of those things gets done, even though those would all be really good. And the odds of him getting even like 1% of those done are small. But we can either continue to put ourselves in positions where, as people continue to try to work within the Republican Party, continue to try the same tactics of the past and see them fail, we can put ourselves in the position where we've built relationships with these people and we can have an influence on what they do, and they view us as an ally to turn to and consider from rather than just an opposition. Or we can go back to the old status quo where we continue to get 2 to 3% of the vote every 4 years and nothing really changes.
Well, let's also be honest too. I mean, politics is very transactional. Like, that's how you get things done in DC. You do something for me, I do something for you. So the offer that we have on the table is the libertarians have the ability to get me over the finish line. I'm speaking as if I'm Donald Trump. And if you do that, I will, at my end of the transaction, I will give you avoiding World War III, freeing Ross Ulbricht, and abolishing the Department of Education. That's the transaction that's being offered. Will he renege on it at the end of the day? Maybe. We don't know. But that's the nature of politics. We don't have the ability to win the presidency. We only have the ability to leverage our small influence to try and extract some concessions. These are the concessions. That's it. It's as simple as that. If that offends you, well, then you should just avoid and ignore politics entirely, like, honestly, because that's how the Leviathan operates. That's how it moves. And that's actually the best aspects of how it moves, because the rest of the time it moves in just abject and overt violence. At least in this one, maybe we're deceived, but at least it's an offer of something. So I think that's the interesting opportunity that we have in front of us. I like anybody that's poo-pooing it. I totally respect that too, because it's like, oh, these people are going to screw you over, that they're never going to give you what they are promising. You might be right. How the F would I know? I mean, this is the first time that this has ever happened, though. So I think that it's kind of our duty to see what fruit it bears, because we're not going to win regardless. So, like, why not see what the fruit is here? As you were saying with Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, let's see what the fruit is. We don't know yet. So that's kind of my perspective on it.
Well, and Jordan Peterson's real interesting. There are so many people I know who actually kind of indirectly found their way to the libertarian movement because of Jordan Peterson. Because like when you read his books and we really listen to his biblical lectures and you hear like the underlying repeated themes in his work, which is like compare human action from Mises and the talk about how the economy is a the sum total of all the individual actions which are made based upon people making rational choices that they think are going to get them to a better place. So they have to kind of evaluate all their possible choices and make subjective value judgments. Okay, now compare that to Jordan Peterson talking about how in order to act in the world, there's always going to be hierarchies, and there's a hierarchy of values that you construct. And, and he obviously connects that both to psychology and economics and religion, but there's such it's such a rich philosophical crossover between what Jordan Peterson talks about and what libertarianism talks about and what Christianity talks about. And so, like, yeah, does it suck that he has Netanyahu on his show and tells them to give him hell on X? Like, yeah, that sucks. You know what also sucks? That like 90% of the population that's not either far left or libertarian also basically does that. Even though like the non-interventionism seems to be more present than it used to be, but what's motivating that is basically like American first and like we just don't want to be involved. But there's still a lot of people who are generally on Israel's side because like they haven't looked into this. But like, okay, if you like, we have two options: make Jordan Peterson our enemy, or if we stay in his orbit, maybe eventually you can have Jordan Peterson run into a Scott Horton or a Daryl Davis or a not Daryl Davis, Daryl Brooks, or Connor Freeman or someone from the Libertarian Institute, and at least get him to platform someone like that and consider the perhaps that there's more. I know Jordan knows this, that there's always more than one side to history. He's actually, because he understands the complexity of political arrangements and propaganda, he's actually opposed to like the Russia-Ukraine war, and he was opposed to that before a lot of other conservatives were. So like the framework is there. He got one wrong. But like, why do we have to crucify people when they get just one thing wrong?
Well, he's got more than one thing wrong, but I agree with you.
Well, yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, but what's his name? Oh God, I'm blanking on his name. Someone convinced him of Austrian economics, and oh God, the alarm's going off again. Jesus Christ! All right, man, I'm sorry. No. hang in here. It's just making it so I can't think. So I'll be back.
That's fine. While Clint's the yeah, I was JC in the comments. Yeah, I was talking about Daryl Cooper from Martyr Made, who, yeah, that's a whole other. I don't know what your thoughts are on him. I like Daryl Cooper. It's really annoying. Daryl Cooper's another example of this. So like, when he was on Tucker Carlson's, he said a couple things awkwardly or like not quite couched as well as they could have been, and then people were like nitpicking things he said and finding like maybe small errors in them. And then they're like, and see, now, okay, that means he's saying that Churchill wasn't the chief villain, and that means that Hitler was. And so he's engaging in Hitler apologia. It's like, okay, well, go listen to Daryl Cooper's podcast. And like the opening to his first in the series of Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem, he talks about the pogroms that the Jews suffered from in Eastern and Western Europe, and like describes them in like almost gory detail. Like it is actually disturbing the level of specificity he gets into describing the horrors that the Jews suffered in the pogroms in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And he uses that as a context, sort of like a springboard to talk about Zionism and what spurred on the early Zionist movement, which was, a response to really bad anti-Semitism. And then, like, I remember later on, he's then talking about how there were so many opportunities to avoid World War II and save so many Jewish people before the Holocaust happened. It's like you listen to this guy in long form and you go like, okay, there's no way he's a Hitler apologist or anti-Semitic, but of course people don't want to give him the time of day because like, oh, he got one little thing,
Yeah.
right, and
Ridiculous.
yeah, and actually Daryl Cooper gets a lot wrong because he's not even a libertarian. He gets, I actually, I had to, so people got offended by his historic revisionism. I got offended like episode 2 of his series because he went on like a 20-minute spiel about how dumb anarchists are. And I had to like walk away and go, okay, he's probably mostly talking about the left anarchists and historic anarchists. And I don't know if he really knows about anarcho-capitalism. And I need to not be, a triggered libertarian about it's like what are your thoughts on this? Like, do you think that there's a lot of libertarians who unfortunately only listen to libertarians and don't know how to find value from non-libertarian
I don't know.
figures and thinkers?
Yeah, I can't tell you. I'm not one of them. So if that's the case, I don't get it. I mean, I listen to a few libertarians, but the vast majority of people I listen to are not libertarians. I think that it's much more interesting. I want to have ideas that I don't agree with. If I'm just hearing, I don't want to go to Church of Liberty and just have someone preach to me. Anyways, the point I wanted to make real quick, because it looks like my building may be getting cleared out. We'll see. Seyfuddin Amos, he convinced Jordan Peterson on Bitcoin, and Michael Malice convinced Jordan Peterson on voluntarism. So this guy is malleable. He is not some ideologue that can't be reached. You can actually, if you give him a better idea, he will hear you out and he will actually then go and spread it, because all he talked about was voluntarism during that speech and during the event. It was amazing. I mean, he sounded more libertarian than I've ever heard him. So if people want to give up on him, that's their prerogative. I'm not going to give up on him. I'm going to act more Christian than the Christians and offer him grace and forgiveness and kindness and love. And if he betrays me at the end, if he's Judas at the end, okay. It wouldn't be the first or last time that I'll be betrayed by someone that I give, trust to that I shouldn't have.
Isn't that, maybe we'll end on this and a little early because I know you might have to be leaving and your alarm might go off again in any event.
Yeah, this is insane, man. Sorry.
Yeah, stuff happens. But I don't remember who talked about it, but someone up on the stage talked about how there is a risk to this. Actually, this was from Angela's speech she didn't give, but she then recorded later on, that it is riskier to do what like you're talking about doing, what I'm talking about doing, what these rallies past weekend represented. Like, yeah, this is riskier. We all put ourselves in more vulnerable positions by trying to trust one another, to work with one another despite our disagreements, and hope that there aren't snakes about, and hope that we don't get stabbed in the back at the end of the day. But like, man, if we don't, as libertarians, want to take that risk, if we don't believe that we can ever trust anyone, well, then how could we tell people that we should have a libertarian society in the first place? Like, if people are that far gone, if we can't trust each other to that degree, well, then stop preaching about free markets. Stop talking about Mises and the idea of human cooperation. Like, listen, I'm not saying there's not going to be some snakes in the grass, to use a Jordan Peterson way of describing it. But we got to just have a little bit of faith, just a mustard seed of faith to believe that there's more good people in this broader coalition of conservatives, of libertarians, of anti-war leftists, of just state skeptical moderates, that we're going to get a lot more good done by trusting each other and cooperating with each other than if we continue to remain in our ideological bubbles. So you want to
preach
anything you want to add to that, or kind of make as your last word here before I let you go?
No, I mean, I agree. I think that it's obviously true. We are obviously a minority. We obviously don't have the numbers to act as if we don't need these people in our camp. And every time I go to these events, when I have an amazing time, I think everyone's amazing and lovely and beautiful. And then I get online and it's just negativity across the board by people that weren't even there. So I'll end with this. Go to one of these events. See what it's like to interact with these people that aren't your ideological brethren, and see if you can't convince them of some things. Because I found that I can. Every time I go to these things, I have an amazing time. I get to network with very powerful and influential people, and I end up building bridges with people that otherwise I wouldn't have. And we need those bridges. Like, that's how we get our ideas across. Again, the key being voluntarily. If we aren't able to convince people with the power and the truth of our ideas, then there is only violence left, because their ideas are wrong. So if we don't convince them, the violence is going to be wielded against us. So you were saying that it's risky, or that speaker was saying that. I disagree. It's not risky. It's risky not to do this.
Exactly. Yes.
So I'll end with that. The alarm's going off again. Love you, brother. I'm so sorry that this has been such a disastrous stream, but if people want to follow me at Liberty Lock Pod, you know the thing. This is ridiculous. I think that they're going to clear us out at some point, because I've never had the alarm go off 4 times in
That's
30
not a
minutes.
problem. Well, you stay safe, Clint. I appreciate you hopping on. Everyone knows where to find you at, so
Exactly.
I'll let you go, man.
Dude, I'm sorry. If you ever want to do another half an hour to round us out, I promise you I'll do it.
Cool. All right. Well, maybe we'll set something like that up, but I'll let you go. I'm going to keep going just myself solo until my next stream. So we will just move to, if you guys want to do some Q&A, we can do that while I'm waiting for some Q&A, because my next stream is at 6:30. So I could end this, or I'll just keep talking with you fine folks. If you guys want to throw some questions or even some super chats in there, I'll talk whatever you guys want to talk about. I will say, just in response to what Clint said, he's absolutely right that and actually, I think this was exactly from Angela's speech, and she's coming on Tuesday, and we're going to get into this even more, which is that it's risky to trust each other, but it's riskier not to. And so we have no choice but to trust each other if we want to actually make a difference. And I don't know, I can't see all of you who are out there watching this. There's hundreds of you, and I don't know what's motivating you. I can tell you what's motivating me, and maybe you've heard what's motivating me in the background of this stream, because this stream was a little bit earlier than what I usually do. I usually do streams around 7:30. Today was kind of an oddity. I usually do streams around 7:30 because I have children. I have 5 children, and 7:30 is when we put them up to bed, and so they're not going to be loud. So you might have heard the occasional child above me yelling or carrying on, making some noise. They're my why. Other than my faith in Jesus Christ, because if that's all I had, maybe I'd just be a monk or something. But I am not going to live my life and look back on my deathbed and go and not be able to say that I did everything within my ability to leave the world a better place than it was for me, to leave it a better place for my children. And so far we're losing that fight. So we can either we can either work with what we have to affect the most good, or we can make perfect the enemy of the good and accomplish nothing. I have some ideological disagreements, or not ideological. I have some practical political disagreements with Clint. Clint is a little bit more closed borders than I am, right? I'm kind of like, and I've always been a little bit, I guess, wishy-washy, maybe a little bit of a flip-flop on that, but I've always thought that, generally speaking, it is better to have a more open immigration system than a more closed one. Problems both ways. Ultimately, I'm an ANCAP. We understand as ANCAPs that the only solution is to privatize everything. But until we get there, what do? Clint's more of we need to close the borders, have tighter immigration controls. Someone like Dave Smith is also like that. I don't make Dave Smith or Clint Russell or other libertarians who have that mindset my enemy. For one, I can understand where they're coming from. And 2, we agree on everything else very closely. So, and here's the other truth. We're not going to have totally open borders. and we're not going to have totally closed borders. So it's kind of dumb to divide over that anyway. We have to speak to the deeper issues. I think about Matthew 5. I've talked a lot about Matthew 5 on the show uh, historically. That's the Sermon of the Mount for those who don't know. But I even talked about it on a recent episode and in some recent debates I did. And it like the entire theme of the Sermon of the Mount is Jesus kind of taking Old Testament laws and principles and pointing out where people were misapplying them and misunderstanding them. They would take, like, for example, like laws against well, here's a good one. There was a principle of proportionality that, like, if someone steals from you or if someone damages property, etc., that, like, you've heard it said, Jesus says, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? But what people were doing with that was, instead of kind of like using that in its actual limited utility of, well, okay, so like eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth means that, like, if you broke a contract with me which resulted in me being financially harmed, well, then there should be some kind of financial restitution to make me whole, right? Or if you are aggressing against me, like actually, like, threatening violence against me, that then I can use like reciprocal means to then, like, to prevent you from doing that, even if it's lethal. But what that principle doesn't mean is to live your life in such a way as to be tit for tat with every little wrong thing that someone does to you. Like, someone insults you, and so you insult someone back, and someone was late to an appointment with you, and so you decide, like, well, I'm gonna show up late next time. I could be, it's being petty, right? And not having grace for people, to be like, like, if you're a penny short, sorry, no dice. If you're 5 minutes late, that's not good. So that kind of stuff. And Jesus said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you now to, if someone strikes you on your face, to turn to them the other cheek. And if someone asks you to walk a mile with them, to walk a second mile. And if someone asks for your cloak, to give them your, I forget, like your boots or something else as well. And he says that to, now, not to say that some people mistake this passage to be about pacifism because of the turn the other cheek. He's saying, no, it means, instead of being petty and ungracious with people, learn to not only be gracious with people and to forgive small offenses, but to actually, like, go beyond, like, above and beyond that. Like, if someone has like wronged you or inconvenienced you, don't just forgive them, but show love to that person. And that will, like, let's say, like, someone inconvenienced me by showing up really late to some kind of appointment. I could be like, well, you only have, 30 minutes left, and I'm still going to charge you full price and all that. Now, like, read the room. Maybe there's different motivations. Like, maybe they were late because they're a very irresponsible person. Or maybe they were late because of circumstances out of their control. And use discernment to decide, you know what, like, I should cut this person a break. And maybe they're actually going through something hard. Maybe they could use my help. So Jesus was saying, I don't want you to live tit for tat and not with grace for one another. I want you to actually love your neighbor and to try to go above and beyond the bare minimum. And that's just one part of the Sermon on the Mount. There are so many examples of this. And let me now bring this back to my point. The point of the Sermon on the Mount is we should not be looking to be as evil as we can be. We should not be looking to get away with as much as we can be. We should not be looking at morality as like a legalistic set of codes that tell us what we can get away with and what we can't get away with. But rather, we should be seeking the ways which we can do the utmost good towards people, and not just shirking away from our greater understanding of morality. Like, we shouldn't be looking at rules and just examining them as words on paper and just kind of like the literal meaning of the text, but looking at what the heart of it is. Not just the letter of the law, but the heart of the law. And where this connects to what Clint and I were just talking about is that there are a lot of people who will judge the external without judging the internal. And they will look at someone like Jordan Peterson and go, well, he's wrong on Zionism. It's like, okay, but why is he wrong on Zionism? Is he wrong on Zionism because he's pro-war and he has no ability to understand complex political arrangements and no sympathy for people who are the victims of state oppression and state interventionism? Or is it perhaps that, maybe his core instincts are correct and he's just wrong on some of these issues? Or when it comes to other libertarians and their political strategies, okay, is it messier, right? Does it look as picture perfect for libertarians to coalition with Republicans and MAGA and ex-Democrats who are kind of Republican now, and people who are not, voting libertarian come November? Is that as like picture perfect? Maybe not. But what's the heart of it? So on the surface of this past weekend, it could be easy to have a very uncharitable, a very ungracious mindset and go, it was a Trump rally. Everyone showed up to support Trump. But if you look at the actual heart of what people were there for, they were there because, the way I would put it, the fields are ripe for the harvest. There are so many people who are fed up with the state, so many people who are fed up with rising totalitarianism, so many people who are completely fed up with their everyday lives not having multiple moments interrupted by state overreach and control. The lockdowns woke people up to a very severe intrusion of state interventionism. But I think since then, even excuse me, even as the lockdowns subsided, people's eyes were now awake and they were kind of seeing, oh, okay, it's not just the lockdowns and the mandates. There's actually so many ways in which the state's interfering with my day-to-day life. And there are so many areas of our society in which the state has a massive controlling power or interest in it. And we're actually not okay with that. Because what happened in 2020 didn't just come out of nothing. The circumstances, the environment, the variables that had to be there for the state to have the power to do that pre-existed COVID. And so people are starting to realize that and go, you know what, if we don't want totalitarianism again, then we have to actually do something about it. Now, so I would say that the heart of so many of these people are in the right place. Do they have, perfect free market Austrian principles at play when they're talking about matters of the economy? Well, no. A lot of them maybe identify as being pro-free market, but they still advocate for bad things, or they justify things like tariffs, which are part of Trump's plan. Hey, you know what? Speaking of tariffs, the Libertarian Party was there at that event, and their table was handing out literature on why Trump's tariff plan would be a disaster for Americans. Weird. Almost like, I've heard so many people say that the Libertarian Party, which, by the way, full disclaimers, LCI is a nonprofit, and we're not endorsing political candidates or parties, but just, like to talk about these things to educate the viewer. But it's funny, I heard so many people saying Angela McCardle and Libertarian Party, they're just a grift for Trump. They just want to support Trump. They just want to get Trump elected. They're just full-blown MAGA. It's a whole MAGA plot. It's like, so you're saying that, like, they coalitioned to speak against the things we agree with these groups on, and then to have an opportunity to talk to them and say, hey, we agree on all this other stuff, but here's a major point of disagreement that we'd like to talk about because, tariffs actually hurt our efforts towards our collective shared goals. So it's almost like the Libertarian Party and the libertarians like Clint and Angela and others who are involved in these coalitions, it's almost like what they're trying to do isn't to just get Trump elected. It's like they're trying to, I don't know, make more libertarians. It's like they're trying to grow the liberty movement. It's like they're trying to actually have an impact on the future of this country and by consequence the world. But, I guess it would be better for them to just stay home, repeat a bunch of libertarian platitudes online over and over again, and never change anyone's mind. And that's that. We can either decide to listen to the call that God gave Jonah, and we can go to Nineveh. We can be completely aware. We can go into Nineveh with our eyes open, and we can understand that they're sinners. We can understand that they don't fully embrace the truth. We can understand that they've done a lot of horrible things even. And we can understand that we have a lot of we understand a lot more of what's going on in the world than perhaps they do. And it would be easy for us to be like Jonah and go like, better than them. They're a bunch of filthy sinners. It's a waste of time. Why would I go there? Like, I'll write them a letter. I'll just, it's like going on social media and calling Republicans idiots, calling, MAGA socialists and calling leftists communists. It's like, yeah, Jonah could just wrote them a letter and said, hey, you sinners. You reject God. You're evil. Or maybe we should understand that we, like Jonah, are called into the Ninevehs that we are called into to speak truth and to offer a path of repentance, a path of salvation. And so one of the parallels between Christianity and libertarianism is this idea of offering a path of salvation. And for libertarians, what they can do is go out into the world and address the root causes of totalitarianism, the root causes of why there are people suffering in North Carolina and in the southern states right now as FEMA and the government fail to deliver any substantive aid or relief to the people who have been paying their taxes dutifully year after year after year, all supposedly paying their taxes to this one giant state apparatus that's supposed to protect them, that's supposed to keep them safe, that's supposed to help them out in emergencies. And when it comes down to it, doesn't have time for them, but it has time to send, $10 billion to Ukraine and tens of more millions to hundreds of millions more to Israel and Lebanon to continue war and to continue the American empire and interventionism across the globe. There's always time for that. We can reach these people. We can show them as they're going through this suffering. And instead of laughing at them and going, well, you voted for them, dummies. We told you. We told you that voting Republican or Democrat wasn't going to work out for you. We could have no grace in our hearts for them. Or libertarians can offer a path of salvation by going, you know what? This is because of the problems of central planning. This is the problem of economic calculation. This is the problem of the corruption of centralized power. This is the problem of lobbying, which is inevitable once you give the government control over currency and control to regulate businesses and to break up businesses and to print money at will and change interest rates. Libertarians should be explaining all of this to people and showing them that there's a way out of this, that we can prevent future suffering if we embrace the ethics of liberty. Little name drop there. And Christians can come alongside and go, we look to the state in our society as the source of our freedoms and the source of where good and bad come from. And the state is supposed to take care of us and to protect us and save us when we are in need. but ultimately you will always be let down by the kingdoms of man and the institutions of man, and instead there is one man who died and rose again, and he is a true savior, and he will never let you down. And in him, you can, if you place him as your sovereign, you will find that you are able to set order to the chaos of your life, and then marry these two, libertarianism and Christianity. You can bring order to the chaos of your life, and then bring order to the chaos of your community and your society. And so that's what we should be doing. That's what these coalitions represent. That's the heart of what's going on here. And the libertarians like Angela and Clint who are picking up on this, they're the ones who I'm going to align with. And the libertarians who want to do Monday morning quarterback and you're just not libertarian enough. And the Christians who want to listen, there might be valid criticisms of Russell Brand. I don't think you should baptize people in your whitey tidies. But man, let's have a little bit of grace for new Christians, and let's offer that gentle correction and push them to do better, rather than with cynicism, just immediately discarding any possible oh well, their faith isn't genuine, their salvation isn't genuine, it's just a grift. Well, that's unfortunate. That's not the way I'm going to approach these things. I'm going to approach it with hope, and I'm going to approach it believing that it's better to take the risk of trusting people, because that risk is far less than the risk of not trusting people. Well, that'll be where I end this. I'm going to set up the next stream here. If there's any last minute questions anyone wants to throw in the chat, I'll answer them while I'm getting this set up. Otherwise, it reminds me, I gotta send the link to our guest. my wife is watching my wife's usually not able to watch my live streams, and she's texting me and agreeing with the things I said, which is pretty cool. I once actually did a live stream with my wife, which I'd like to do again at some point. All right. Any questions in the chat? No questions. There's a lot of you out there watching. You're just you're a quiet bunch today. That's all right. Maybe you guys are a little shy. All right. I am find the right group chat here. There we go. Boom. Sent that to him. And I'm going to do, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I'm going to do one of those cool things where you, it's not a raid. What's that thing where you, on YouTube where you can, I'm going to transfer you to the next stream automatically. I forget what it's called on YouTube. I guess it's a redirect. Yeah. So scroll here. Public customization. I haven't done this in a while. I kind of forget how to do it. Customize. Here we go. Redirect. Add. And boom. And save. Alrighty. Well, I got the redirect set up. So those of you who are watching, you will be redirected to the next stream. So I'm going to be joined by my good friend Nick here from PA, who is a fellow libertarian who is running for office here. So we're going to have a conversation about that, and sort of, he's probably going to have some things to add on to this conversation I just had with Clint as well. So I will talk to you guys on the other side. And as I always end a stream by saying, live at peace, live for Christ. Take care.